Today I want to tell you a little bit about some experiences that we're having with government agencies sharing data using differential privacy. I'm going to talk in detail about a particular case study that involves the Department of Education and the College Scorecard web application. So College Scorecard is a website, it's up now, hosted and created by the Department of Education with the goal of helping parents and students learn more about their college choices, what degrees to major in, and how to invest their education dollars. And so when this was first created and released, it was hailed as a significant step in bringing more transparency to higher education. And in particular, what excited people about College Scorecard, I think, was that there was a focus on the extent to which post-secondary institutions contributed to student economic success. And economic success was measured by earnings data. And so unlike all the other kind of college rankings that were out there at the time, College Scorecard distinguished itself by having statistics about earnings that people had a few years out from graduation for various degrees from various schools. The challenge of making this a reality was that the Department of Education has no earnings data, and earnings data is very difficult to get from people. If you try to ask them how much they make, you get a lot of bias, and people don't like to tell you those things. So to make this a reality, the Department of Education had to interact with the Internal Revenue Service, the main taxing agency in the US. And so this talk is largely about the relationship between these two agencies. The Department of Education, who wants to create a new data product, the College Scorecard, and the Internal Revenue Service that has lots of earnings data, but has a burden to protect it. So essentially what the Department of Education wanted to do was that they knew the people that went to a certain school and got a certain degree. They had their social security numbers, in fact, and so they wanted to send collections of social security numbers to the IRS, and then the IRS would be able to look at earnings in a particular year. This might be 5 years from graduation. And so the IRS could create this distribution that you see on the screen of earnings, but each one of those dots is an individual's information. This is highly sensitive, and the IRS does not release this data. So de-identifying the data and releasing is not an option, but they might be willing to publish statistics about these distributions. So what Department of Ed was really asking for as a response from the IRS was a record that said, okay, for Duke graduates with a bachelor's degree, the median earnings were $93,000 some number of years after graduation. Actually, many more statistics than that because it was many schools, and I've kind of illustrated this as an interaction, but it actually all happens in a big batch with Department of Ed sending a bunch of social security numbers to IRS and getting a big bunch of tables out, actually millions of statistics. So although these are aggregate statistics, are highly sensitive, and so it's worth digging into the motivations of these two parties as they interact and try to make this data exchange work. The IRS has to comply with regulation, US Title 26. It's bound to protect all taxpayer information, including the simple fact that a person did or did not file taxes as protected information, and they want to avoid privacy attacks that could result from publishing many statistics about taxpayers. The Department of Education, on the other hand, is mostly in the role of the data analyst. They're the consumer of data. They may be representing interests of downstream consumers of their data, but ultimately they had some analytic tasks in mind. And to the extent possible, we hope that when they have analytic tasks in mind, they're able to describe their standards for fitness of use. How much data do they need? How accurately do they need it? So ultimately, the interaction between the data custodian and the data analyst is the familiar sort of privacy utility trade-off, where the data custodian is primarily trying to manage risk, privacy risk, and do it responsibly, and would like to lower their risk essentially, because that's their mission. And the data analyst would like more data and more accurate data. And so either side of this sort of spectrum is a bad outcome, I think you'd agree. If we favor lower risk and low data quality, then we lose the chance to gain insights from this earnings data, and we may come to incorrect conclusions, and we don't have educational transparency, the end goal. And if we favor higher data quality at higher risk, we could have privacy breaches, violations of regulation, and so on. So the question is, can we find a happy medium here? So the college scorecard has been going on for a number of years, and a happy medium, some medium has been found, I think a relatively happy medium, but it's evolved over time. So from 2015 to 2019, IRS was using what I typically call informal privacy protection. So they were not just publishing raw statistics, but to add more privacy protection to those statistics, they were distorting the income medians, and they were also suppressing a lot of data, which means that if the Department of Ed was asking for income statistics about a group that was very small, so for example, at Duke, there just weren't that many majors in a certain year, they would just not publish information about that group if it was too small, because it was considered too disclosive. But after 2019, IRS switched to differential privacy. And so we've done 2 releases in 2020 and 2021 with them, and we're working on a 3rd. And so I'd like to explain some of the reasons behind this shift. So as the years went on, and when they started in 2015, the data was actually, that IRS released was actually fairly coarse-grained. It was at the institution level. But as time went on, in part because people were excited about the potential of the college scorecard application, they asked for more and more and more detailed information, going from institution level statistics to program level, doing breakouts of these populations by gender and Pell status, which is a proxy for low income status, and asking for more information about the distributions, not just medians, but 25th and 75th percentile and some other statistics about poverty thresholds. So this starts to pose really tough questions for the data custodian. How much additional risk is the IRS incurring as they publish more and more data? And as they publish data year by year, and they consider cohorts of students that are overlapping, so an individual's information can appear in more than one cohort. And how should they respond? How do they decide whether to suppress more data or to distort the medians and other quantiles that they're releasing more? These questions are almost impossible to answer in a principled way. And so that's a lot of what motivated differential privacy, the need for the data custodian to understand incremental risk and manage it more in a more principled manner. Okay, so a little background on differential privacy. I know most people are familiar with it, but an informal definition of differential privacy is that it is a standard for computations on data that strictly limits the personal information that could be revealed by the output. So what I've shown here in the dotted green box is a program that runs on data and produces an output. There's a little die in there because these programs are randomized. And there's also a special parameter epsilon, which is a formal bound on the worst case privacy loss that can result from releasing an output computed by this program. So that epsilon privacy loss bound you can think of as being carried along with the output, because anyone you share this output with, that's the sort of privacy risk you bear. So it's a rigorous guarantee of protection. Every individual is protected, every attribute of every individual, and the guarantee doesn't rely on assumptions about computational power or background knowledge. And therefore, we like to say that it resists both current attacks and is likely to resist future attacks. Okay, so in our engagements with government agencies, this workflow for deploying differential privacy is emerging, where we elicit requirements, like what are they trying to learn about from a data set. We put together a prototype algorithm. These algorithms have parameters, lots of parameters sometimes. And so then there's a phase of exploration and negotiation, which usually involves both the data custodian and the data analyst or the consumer of the data. And that's an iterative process that I'm going to describe next. And that happens before, the end result of that process is to kind of come to a final decision about this trade-off between risk, privacy risk, and accuracy and degree of detail in what's published. Okay, so let's look at this kind of mock-up of an interface that describes some of the data release levers. So this is what we would like to put in front of the data custodian and the data analyst and help them to make decisions about it. So at the very top here, I have a release description. So this is the part of an interface that would describe how detailed are the statistics that are going to get published. And so there's some checkboxes here, and there's some things grayed out or not grayed out about whether you're publishing more detailed quantiles or less detailed quantiles. Then there's an algorithm. So there's a differentially private algorithm that is going to compute private statistics, and that algorithm has parameters, both some parameters that have to do with epsilon shares, how the epsilon budget is distributed, and some other privacy semantics related parameters, like the total epsilon budget, and maybe some subtleties about user contributions. And what we want to put next to that, so for any setting or setting of the sort of knobs or levers on the left-hand side, we could run a bunch of scenarios and produce measures that describe fitness for use. And these are often application dependent on the particular concerns of the data analyst, but we want to present the things that matter to them in terms of error metrics. So for any setting of the knobs on the left, you could look at error displayed one way or another. In this case, we're looking at bins of relative error for groups of students and their earning statistics. Okay, so before we get into tough negotiations, one thing to note is that there are some things you can do in this space that are wins for both the custodian and the analyst. First of all, we want good accuracy and we want good privacy protection. And if we can do the analysis on more data, we get both of those things. The other thing we can do is make sure that our differentially private algorithms are not suboptimal. So there are, in general, many ways to do the same computation in a differentially private way. Some deliver more error than others. And so we want to find algorithms that perform well. And if we can iterate a little bit on those things, then there's no sort of conflict between the interests of the custodian and the analyst. But when we get beyond those things and we've settled on an algorithm and we have a data source that's often not possible to get more data, then we look at the release description, and the analyst can play around with this. They can decide whether they want to release more data. I mean, they typically want to release as much data as they can, but what they can look at here, by reducing the sort of granularity of the data they're releasing, the error may improve. That assumes that we have a fixed settings for the privacy semantics. So that's where the data custodian is setting their risk tolerance. And then there are some other parameters, algorithm parameters, that can impact the accuracy displayed over here, but aren't changing the risk tolerance or what's being published. They're just kind of like distributing error in different ways. But that can have a big impact. And so we have states in the negotiation where the analyst may say, I really want to publish all this stuff, but I'm looking at the error and it's higher than I want it to be. It doesn't meet my fitness for use criteria. So the first thing the analyst will probably say is, can't you just make the error better whatever way you can, which is to the data custodian accepting more risk and raising the epsilon. And the data custodian may say, no, I'm not willing to do that. You need to look at other options for lowering the error and meeting your fitness for use criteria. And so that is what might force them to consider releasing less data or distributing the data in different ways through setting the parameters. So there's lots more to say about this picture that I won't have time to say, but we can maybe talk in discussion later. So outcomes. When the IRS switched to differential privacy, we were able to release more earning statistics than previously with about the comparable accuracy. And we've given IRS sort of more assurance and better risk management. I mean, I think they sleep better at night because they have a principled basis on which to make decisions about what to publish. And we've streamlined communication by providing tools similar to the one on the last slide that allows exploration and iteration on this negotiation process. I'll end with a few conclusions and challenges. I think what I'm talking about today is actually sort of fundamental to part of what the model of differential privacy teaches us, which is that, and the research that led to differential privacy, which is that we should carefully consider the uses we want we have in mind for data and fitness for use standards. We should have customized data products rather than universal data products where we can publish, where we think we might be able to publish things that sort of work for all analyses. We know from the theory of differential privacy that we can't really achieve that will open ourselves up to attacks. And so this is a move from universal data products to customized data products, and I think that entails this step where we help the analyst look carefully at sort of the frontier of what's possible with the privacy technology and with the risk tolerance of the data custodian. Calculating and communicating error to analysts and stakeholders is challenging, and in fact, it could incur its own privacy loss. So I've glossed over that topic, but we could come back to it in discussion later. And lastly, we've learned actually that data consumers don't want to see high error outputs. And one interesting thing that happened in our engagement with IRS is that they used to suppress for privacy protection. And now, when they adopted differential privacy, they no longer need to suppress data for privacy protection because there's noise in the data that protects. But they don't like super noisy observations, so they will suppress those for data quality reasons. So that was an interesting finding. Even when we quantified error for them, they often don't want to show highly noisy observations to end users. I will end there. And happy to take a few questions if there are some.